All right, everybody, I see it is 1 o'clock Central Time according to my clock. So let's go ahead and get started. We've already got a whole lot of people on here. So I am super excited to see, I always scroll down the list of names as people are signing in, and I see so many names that I recognize, and I'm honored to get to do this, and I appreciate you joining this webinar and listening to a little bit about what we have to offer at Blatchford. So I've got Todd on here also. Todd, if you can go ahead and flip to the next slide, because he's going to be running most of the PowerPoint, so I'm going to have him control these first couple while I'm talking. Todd, go ahead and go to the next slide, please. Before we get started, I just want to, again, thank you for being here. Like I said a second ago, I really am. It's just such a joy to see the names of people that I recognize signing in. So, but everybody is on mute, and that just makes it a little bit easier. I am in the middle of a thunderstorm here, so if you hear thunder in the background, that's my computer not on mute. Nobody else's. And the webinar is being recorded. You should have got that message right when you signed in. All webinars are recorded, and you can watch them. Watch previous webinars. They're all listed on our website. You can go to them at blatchfordus.com and search for the webinar section. It's under the education portion. You can also register for future webinars there. You can use the question and answer panel for any questions you may have, and I will be monitoring that. We're going to have Todd be speaking most of the time here, but I'm going to be monitoring the Q&A sessions. So if you have any questions, please type away, and I'll answer back. If it's a question that the whole audience needs, I'll kindly interrupt Todd and throw his flow off and answer the question for everybody. If you have any immediate questions or questions following, you can always reach me at mike.mcgee@blatchfordus.com. Again, it's mike.mcgee@blatchfordus.com. You can always reach me there. So again, my name is Mike McGee. I'm a CPO. I'm the Global Education Manager and Senior Prosthetist at Blatchford. I have been with the company for 12 and a half years now. So I've seen quite a bit of change and quite a bit of advancement as we've progressed the products throughout the line. And Todd's going to talk a little bit about that as we go. But that's my QR code there. You can scan that. That will give you my cell phone and my email address. You can text me or call me and or email me if you have any questions or you need any support. Feel free to reach out. When you do that QR code, it will ask you if you want to share your contact information back. Feel free to do that. That way I know you've taken that contact, and it just, I like being able to be connected to those that listened. And without further ado, we've got Todd O'Hare on the line. Todd's a certified prosthetist and also a physical therapist. So Todd, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thanks, Mike. Again, Todd O'Hare. I've been with Blatchford for a little over a year. Prior to that, I spent 15 years in a combination of private practice and hospital-based setting, with the last 10 years as managing a hospital-based O&P department. And before that, I was a physical therapist for about a decade and made that jump to O&P at the perfect time when my girls were an infant and a toddler. So my wife was really appreciative of me taking on a new career and a new life when we had nothing really else going on. You can reach me by that QR code also, and that is my email, and that is a perfect way to reach out and get in touch if you need me. So today we're going to be talking about our Elan and our Elan IC, which is part of our microprocessor foot options. We're going to talk about what are the benefits for your patients, how do you fit and align each foot, and then who is appropriate for a microprocessor. We have a lot of unique features that make Blatchford the industry leader in microprocessor foot technology. But let's start first with a little bit about Blatchford. We actually were not acquired by Blatchford. Maybe a few of you knew us as Endolite, but in the 90s, Blatchford, which started in 1890 in England, has always been involved in prosthetics, orthotics, and seating systems. But in the 90s, they brought only their prosthetic technology to the United States. And as a result, they called themselves Endolite. They called that arm Endolite, which was endoskeletal lightweight. But in 2019, we were acquired by a 2018, 2019, we were acquired by a private equity practice. And they took a step back and said, hey, let's rebrand so everyone knows us as one company providing services around the world. So we were rebranded as Blatchford. And as you can see, in 2009, we launched the Echelon, which was the first commercially available hydraulic ankle, allowing independent dorsiflexion and plantar flexion resistance, allowing 6 degrees of plantar flexion and 3 degrees of dorsiflexion in that articulation. But then you will get additional plantar flexion and dorsiflexion simulation with the heel spring compression, toe spring compression. And we advanced that to the Elan line, the Elan, which then eventually became the Elan IC, which a couple of years ago. And that was the first microprocessor hydraulic ankle. There was other microprocessor ankle on the market, but it was not a hydraulic ankle. And then let's just go back a few years. In 2010, we developed the Orion, which was our microprocessor knee. We have now had multiple iterations of that, and it is the Orion 3. And we combined the Orion technology and the Elan technology to create the Lynx, the only bidirectional communication system that is truly integrating the knee and the foot together for a fully integrated system. So let's jump into your world, and that is treating patients. As you know, individuals who are amputees expend more energy walking, and it increases as you progress with a more proximal amputation, and it increases as you progress potentially, unfortunately, to a bilateral amputation. Amputees have a higher chance of a low back pain. They have increased risk of osteoarthritis on their sound limb and an increased risk of osteopenia on their prosthetic side. They tend to report more falls than the general population. They also have issues with skin on their residual limb side, but also, as you know, especially in that diabetic or peripheral neuropathic or vascular condition pathologies that our patients may have, they also have a higher risk of ulceration on their contralateral side. They have a higher risk of having to have an amputation on their contralateral side. So we are working with individuals who we really have to focus our prosthetic design specific to their needs of maintaining the skin integrity and maintaining the overall musculoskeletal integrity of their body. Most individuals with an amputation will walk without at least one gait deviation. Well, let's just take a step back and think about normal human locomotion and the amount of knee flexion that occurs at initial contact and loading response. It can be up to 10 to 15 degrees of knee flexion to provide that shock absorption at initial contact and loading response. Well, how do we align our prosthesis? Well, we align our transtibial socket with anywhere, depending upon the patient presentation, right, between 3 to 7 degrees of socket flexion. So we are already limiting the amount of knee flexion that they can achieve. And so this leads to a difference between their sound limb and their prosthetic limb with gait. So this leads to those gait deviations. And then we lead to those gait deviations, it leads to those asymmetries, that increased risk of low back pain, more time spent on their sound limb during gait and less time spent on their prosthetic limb. And with that, that can lead to those secondary musculoskeletal imbalances that cause what I talked about earlier, that joint pathology, that osteoarthritis, that osteopenia, that increased energy expenditure. So when we are designing our prosthesis, we are doing what we can to decrease these secondary musculoskeletal complications. Our hope today, as we talk about the Elan and the Elan IC, is that you will see the benefits to your patients to improve that single limb stance, to improve the quality and time spent in single limb stance because of the unique features of the Elan and the Elan IC that are only available with our product. So let's first start with how we developed the Elan and the Elan IC. It was on the premise of our Echelon series. Our Echelon was that first hydraulic ankle to market in 2009. Well, when you look at normal human locomotion, you have 4 rockers in the sagittal plane, and then you're going to have that ML rocker in that coronal and transverse plane. So let's look at what's happening during gait. So at initial contact, you're going to get that heel rocker. That heel rocker is going to provide plantar flexion of the foot to get that foot flat to the ground in a controlled manner. Then as you progress from loading response into mid stance, you're going to have that controlled tibial advancement moving from plantar flexion towards dorsiflexion at the ankle rocker. And then as you move into mid stance, moving towards terminal stance, you're going to go to that forefoot rocker. And then as you move from terminal stance into pre-swing, you're going to get that fourth rocker, which is that toe rocker, where that toe is going to go into increasing extension or dorsiflexion, while the foot is then going into a plantar flexed position to provide that tibial advancement. So when you look at the design of our Elan, which is based on the design of our Echelon, we have incorporated all 4 of those essential rockers in addition to that 5th rocker, which is that ML rocker, to get that appropriate mediolateral compliance of the foot during gait. So let's think about it. Initial contact, heel goes into plantar flexion. We get controlled tibial advancement as we go through that ankle rocker. And as we move into mid stance, into towards terminal stance, we roll over the lateral border of our foot, and then we roll over the medial border of our foot to load that first ray. So that first ray starts getting loaded during forefoot and toe rocker. And that is why we've designed our toe springs to be the way they are, to allow that loading of the foot at initial contact, load and response, moving towards mid stance on the lateral border, while we get the ML compliance of the medial toe spring, and then we roll over the medial border of the foot and load that medial toe spring for that continued forward progression. So that is the design behind our ankle, is to truly mimic human anatomy as best we can. Now, obviously, we can't mimic 26 bones in the foot or the 33 joints that are in the foot, of which 20 articulate, nor can we accommodate for all the tendons and muscles and ligaments that there is over 100 of them in the foot. But what we're trying to do as best we can is mimic the motions that the foot is doing. And so one of the things I look at when I look at our ankle rocker, that number 2, our pivot point is more anterior than any other hydraulic ankle pivot point you will find available to you. And there's a reason for it, because it is the most anatomically accurate. So I think about if I've got an AFO and I've got an articulated AFO with a plantar flexion stop and tamarack joints, I'm not going to go in and put those tamarack joints an inch above the apex of my malleoli, nor am I going to go an inch behind. Rather, I'm going to line them up and accommodate for the height difference between the medial and lateral, but I'm going to line them up as close to the apex of my medial and lateral mal as possible. And that is what we have done with the pivot point of our ankle rocker. So keep that in mind. Our pivot point is going to be more anterior than most. And so when you're doing your bench alignment, you're going to have to keep that in mind, because you're going to look up at your socket and you'll be like, that might be a little bit more anterior than I'm used to, but that is accurate. So don't get thrown off by it. So now let's talk about that interplay between that independent dorsiflexion and plantar flexion resistance that we have. We can dial in plantar flexion separate, then we can dial in the dorsiflexion resistance. So what is that interplay between hydraulic resistance and compression of the heel and toe springs? So if we look at that picture to the left, we have high resistance and low resistance. So on the left, you have that closed system of hydraulic fluid in that cube, same in the low resistance, that closed resistance of hydraulic fluid. But on the left, you only have, let's say, one port open. So you're going to create this turbulent flow, this resistance of the hydraulic fluid to motion, to movement. Whereas in the low resistance, you've got multiple ports open so that you're going to get this nice, smooth, laminar flow. And as a result, you're going to get a different interaction of the springs. The springs are going to either absorb more compression, or the fluid is going to absorb that force transmission. So when you look at high resistance, if you increase the resistance of the system of the hydraulic fluid, you are going to get a greater compression of the spring, because that force is going to transmit into the spring, as opposed to it being absorbed. In a low resistance situation, that force is going to move through the fluid and engage that spring less. Whereas if you've got higher resistance in the hydraulic cylinder, in the plantar flexion resistance or the dorsiflexion resistance, it is going to transmit that force into the spring and compress it more. If you're compressing that spring more, it's going to give you greater energy return, which is going to be more like a concentric muscle contraction, as opposed to if you are lower energy, if you have a lower resistance of that hydraulic fluid, it's going to absorb and decrease the amount of the spring compression. And it's going to give you more of a dampening effect, where you're absorbing that force, you're absorbing that motion. It's more similar to an eccentric contraction. So what's really unique, not only with the Elan do you have that ability to independently dial in the dorsiflexion and plantar flexion resistance specific to the patient's needs at the time, whether they're walking up a hill or down a hill, or whether they're stopped. But on top of that, we have this ability for eccentric, concentric, and almost an isometric contraction, where you get this co-activation of the agonist and antagonistic muscles working together to provide stability. And we'll go a little bit more into that later. But not only do we provide eccentric and concentric, but we have this co-activation that improves the stability and balance for your patients. So we're going to talk about the Elan and the Elan IC. Those are the two microprocessor feet that we have, and we'll talk about those differences. But before we talk about those differences, let's jump into learning a little bit more about Sean and her experience with the Elan IC.
I am 30 years old. I have a huge family, along with my husband and my nearly 2-year-old daughter. When I was 24 years old, I was in New York City, and unfortunately I was hit by a taxi who mounted the curb, and that's how I became an amputee. When I first tried the Elan IC, because I had a lot of prosthetics to compare it to, it was really different for me because it gave me so much structure, which I really wasn't used to. Being a mum, for me, that is key. There's times where I have to carry about 5,000 bags plus my daughter, and you know, it can be wobbly at times being an amputee. But with the Elan IC, it almost like gave me so much more confidence than I was used to. We are quite an active family. We love to take Aria to the park, feed the ducks. We like to go shopping, just do anything that your normal family would do. You know, you're always on the go. When you're a mum, you never stop. So before, I would have to say cook dinner, wash up, make sure my daughter's bathed, and pajamas and in bed. And then after all of that, I would sit down for a little bit, take off my prosthetic, but now I just feel like I can just keep going. Pushing a pushchair up and down hills, that can be really tough. But with the Elan IC ankle, it really does give me that movement, same movement and feeling that I would have with a real ankle. It really does give me that control going up and down, and that I don't have to worry that I'm going to slip or anything like that. When I walk up the stairs now, just even a regular set of stairs, walking up them with this ankle, I can just fly up these stairs. But the best thing about the Elan IC ankle is that it is waterproof. Being with my daughter, splashing in puddles and things like that, I don't have to worry about my leg being all wet and having to dry it all the time. I can just leave it now, and especially going in the shower. The Elan IC has definitely changed my quality of life, because not having to think about the littlest things that you wouldn't think of before when I would wear other prosthetics, it's definitely changed my way of just being almost busier. It's definitely opened up possibilities that I didn't think I could do. I really want to get back dancing and go to boxing classes and just be more active.
Well, my hope is to expand upon what she began and started talking about, but I won't nearly have as intellectual an accent. But hopefully you'll get something out of it. So on the screen here is Julie. Julie, she tried the Elan IC, and unfortunately, her insurance denied it. And you may come across that an insurance company will deny it because it's experimental, but you can work through that, and we can help you through that and provide you additional documentation to help address that if it comes across. In addition, we do have someone that we can have you connect with that can help you fight that if you want to, that we can assist with. But she had a prosthesis for many years, and what she reported during the appeal process to the insurance company, she said, after my amputation, I knew I lost my foot, but I didn't realize until wearing the Elan IC that I had also lost my ankle. And this is like getting your ankle back. So let's go into a little bit more. Now, I'm going to talk about the Elan and the Elan IC. I'm going to indicate in the next slide the difference between the two, but please understand that the technology is the same in the sense that what makes it work, what makes it adapt to the patient's needs at the time that they're walking or standing or going up a hill or down a hill, that technology is the same. So then, what is different? What is different is that the Elan IC is inductive charge. As a result of creating that inductive charge, there are some differences. For instance, it takes about 5.5 hours for a full charge versus only 2 hours in the Elan. The Elan has a port you plug directly into. Because we've fully encapsulated the electronics, we have now made it so that the Elan is waterproof. It is IP rated 67, so it can go 1 meter deep for 30 minutes in fresh water, as opposed to the Elan is weatherproof, okay? Because of the additional battery, it is 4 ounces heavier, which is not significant. I think that's a pack of cards. And it's about 2 millimeters taller, but it still has the same size range of foot size from 22 to 30. It's still, both of them have a 275-pound weight limit. They both allow 6 degrees of plantar flexion and 3 degrees of dorsiflexion. And we do have narrow and wide sizes available, which is nice. We have regular from 22 all the way up to 30, a regular size foot gel, but we also have a narrow for those smaller, more narrow feet from 22 to 28. But we also have that wide size from 25 to 30. So now let's move a little bit more into the overview of the Elan IC. Again, the technology is the same. So we're going to go over what is the technology. We're going to go over standing support. We're going to revert back to some of the things on that screen earlier, showing that it is simple and compact, and it is waterproof, like I mentioned. So when we think of microprocessor control, well, that's great that it has a CPU, but what is the CPU analyzing? What information is it getting, and how does it use that information? Well, there are 3 things to know about the microprocessor. It is taking 3 key pieces of information. We have an accelerometer, a tilt sensor, and a range of motion sensor. So let's think about, take a step back. Accelerometer. So if there's an accelerometer, that tells me it's going to provide information and make changes if patient is standing still, if they're walking at their self-selected walking speed, or if they're walking faster. That's that accelerometer. Now you have a tilt sensor and a range of motion sensor. That tilt sensor and range of motion sensor are going to work together to provide information to the CPU to say, hey, I need to change my plantar flexion and dorsiflexion resistance, that individual ability to independently change plantar flexion and dorsiflexion resistance based on what position the foot is. Am I walking down a hill? Am I walking up a slope? Am I walking on level surface? So let's look at standing support. That is where that accelerometer comes in. As you're walking and you stop, it recognizes, hey, this person is no longer walking anymore. What do I want to do? I want to provide them improved stability, enhanced balance. Plantar flexion and dorsiflexion resistance in the foot automatically increases once it registers that the patient is no longer walking or moving forward or backward or side. So what does this mean? As in this picture, her foot is in a little bit of dorsiflexion, her knee is in flexion on that left side. It has ramped up the plantar flexion and dorsiflexion resistance in that position to provide that co-activation, that enhanced stability, so that she can pick her child up and hold her like that. It is the same co-activation that is occurring in her hamstrings and quads. It's the same co-activation that is occurring on her adductors and abductors at her hip. It is replicating that posterior capsule at the calf, and it's replicating that anterior tibialis that we have in the shin. This is incredibly important for your bilateral users. Your bilateral user is not having to worry about, am I drifting forward? Am I drifting backward? Can I have my right foot in plantar flexion and my left foot in dorsiflexion? And do I have to fight those moments about the knee? Nope, they don't have to fight those moments. Those moments are addressed because the plantar flexion and dorsiflexion resistance ramps up to provide them enhanced stability and balance. And again, this is a unique feature that nobody else has available to their patients, only Blatchford. Let's talk about, it's simple and compact. I mentioned this a couple slides earlier, 5.5 hours charge. You get about 2 days out of it. Some people can get up to 3 days. One thing that is important to understand is that when the battery completely loses charge, it reverts back to an echelon. It reverts back to that independent dorsiflexion and independent plantar flexion resistance that you have dialed in during the programming. It does not become a floppy foot. It does not become a stiff foot, but rather it becomes an articulated ankle with the plantar flexion, dorsiflexion resistance that you dialed in for that patient on their self-selected walking speed. One of the things that we have done is there's a battery indicator light that the patient can check at any time of their day. They don't need an app. They don't need to press a button. They can look down at their foot and tilt their foot a certain way that will give them that information. But when you've got about only 4 hours, 5 hours of battery left life, what happens with the Elan and the Elan IC is standing support mode is turned off. One, that gives the patient an indication, hey, I need to charge my battery. What it also does is that we don't want that person to have their battery die out on them when they're in that stiff mode. So that is one indicator for the patient to know that they need to charge their battery. Again, you're going to get up to 2 days, and some patients of mine have gotten up to 3 days of use from the battery. As I mentioned earlier, with the Elan IC, you are getting the IP67, which is making it waterproof. It is suitable for submersion up to 1 meter for 30 minutes in fresh water. So your patients don't have to worry about getting caught in a rainstorm. They also can take their kayak down the ramp. They can help get their boat down the ramp. They can go fishing in fresh water up to 1 meter deep for 30 minutes. Now let's look at what happens with the Elan IC and the Elan in normal walking. This is the patient's self-selected walking speed on level surface. During normal walking at initial contact, heel strike, initial contact moving into loading response, the foot has a medium amount of plantar flexion resistance. So when you think of the heel as plantar resistance and the toe as dorsal resistance. Heel, plantar, toe, dorsal. So initial contact loading response, the foot goes into 6 degrees of plantar flexion, and as it moves from 6 degrees of plantar flexion towards 3 degrees of dorsiflexion, you are compressing that heel to get that energy return appropriate for medium self-selected walking. As you progress through mid-stance, going from that 6 degrees of plantar flexion to that end of 3 degrees of dorsiflexion, you are now starting to load that toe spring. As you load that toe spring, it's going to release at terminal stance into pre-swing to give you continued forward momentum. And here's what's really key. It is going to maintain that 3 degrees of dorsiflexion during swing. If it maintains that 3 degrees of dorsiflexion during swing, you are less likely to trip because you're going to get better toe clearance. So, life is not a level surface. Life has ramps, slopes, compliant surfaces, and cobblestones, brick, all those things. So what is going on with the Elan IC and the Elan when you look at walking down a slope, up a slope, walking faster, and stopping? Let's take a look at each one of those circumstances individually. So these next 4 pictures are really critical to understanding the unique features of the Elan and the Elan IC. This is something that is only available for us, and the ability to have independent adjustment of both dorsiflexion and plantar flexion in real time for what the patient needs is absolutely critical for their stability, their balance, their gait, and their function. So like I mentioned on the previous slide, self-selected walking speed is going to be a medium amount of resistance at plantar flexion and dorsiflexion. Here, the individual is walking down a slope. So what happens, you can see on the left side of the picture where it says plantar flexion resistance, that plantar flexion resistance has lowered. You can see it's moving towards that minus sign. It went from the middle more towards the minus sign, as opposed to your dorsiflexion resistance went from the middle now more towards the plus sign. So what does that mean? That plantar flexion resistance is softening, is decreasing. Why? So you can get that foot controlled flat to the ground. Our dorsiflexion resistance increases, so you get controlled tibial advancement. You don't get this rapid knee flexion moment. You don't get this excessive momentum that is generated walking down a hill, but rather you get controlled tibial advancement, and you get a knee extension moment that helps control that walking down a hill, almost giving it like a brake effect. The opposite holds true with walking up a hill. As I mentioned, there's a range of motion and tilt sensor that the CPU is analyzing and responding in real time. So now you're walking up a hill. Well, if you're walking up a hill, you want to get over that toe more easily. You don't want that excessive knee extension moment pushing you back, making it hard to get up, making it more challenging to get up that hill. So dorsiflexion resistance softens, so you more easily get up over your toe. The opposite is true at the heel. Plantar flexion resistance increases. It increases so we can engage that heel spring to a greater degree. If we engage that heel spring to a greater degree, it is going to rebound with a greater concentric contraction and therefore helping propel us up the hill, giving us an assist, an uphill assist. Well, now I want to walk fast. So I have that accelerometer that says, hey, you've moved from your self-selected walking speed to a faster cadence. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to soften the dorsiflexion resistance so you can more easily get over your toe because you don't want to weight on your foot. At the same time, I'm going to stiffen it at the heel. I'm going to stiffen that plantar flexion resistance so you compress that heel spring to a greater degree to get more energy return. And finally, you have that accelerometer that registers that you are no longer moving forward or backward. Rather, you have stopped moving, and it is going to ramp up that plantar flexion and dorsiflexion resistance to enhance your stability at that position. Now, you could be in 6 degrees of plantar flexion because you're standing on a slope. downward. You could be 3 degrees of dorsiflexion because you're standing upward on a slope. It is going to ramp up that resistance in that position for you. So let's look at some of the numbers that support the benefits of walking down a hill with the Elan and the Elan IC. In an energy storing and releasing foot, that foot wants to get flat to the ground. It's simulating plantar flexion. It does not have an articulation for plantar flexion, and therefore it wants to get foot flat. You almost get a foot slap and an excessive knee flexion moment. Well, here, if you're getting articulation of 6 degrees of plantar flexion, then you're not going to get that excessive knee flexion range. You're going to get a decrease in that knee flexion moment. This is going to provide greater knee stability, especially for your transfemoral amputees, because that weight line, that ground reaction force, is not going to be posterior to the knee, but rather it's going to be through the knee or even possibly slightly anterior to the knee to give you enhanced stability. We talked earlier about reducing some of those secondary musculoskeletal challenges of the differences between the right and the left side, the prosthetic side and the contralateral side, because you have a base of support that is working on a different center of gravity, because their center of gravity has moved more superior and lateral towards the contralateral side. But we're seeing improved symmetry. We're seeing improved time spent on the prosthetic side and less time spent on the sound side. What is that going to mean? That's going to mean a reduction in low back pain. That's going to be a reduction in those asymmetries, hopefully a reduction in the excessive joint forces on the contralateral side. We are also slowing tibial progression. Why? Because we have that increased dorsiflexion resistance that controls the tibial advancement moving down the hill. You're not going to get that excessive momentum rolling you down that hill. It's going to absorb more energy. And then also, it says it reduces time to foot flat. That seems backwards. Well, don't I want to get to foot flat sooner? Well, because I have controlled plantar flexion rather than a rapid foot slap, the foot slap is getting that foot down faster, but it's also creating that excessive knee flexion moment. With the Elan and the Elan IC, it's allowing that controlled plantar flexion and controlled tibial advancement. Now let's look at walking up a hill. Again, because you reach that 3 degrees of dorsiflexion, it maintains that 3 degrees of dorsiflexion during swing, decreasing the risk for tripping. Also, hopefully lowering their energy expenditure because they're not going to have to vault. They're not going to have to hip hike going up the hill. So again, you get that increased plantar flexion resistance, that decreased dorsiflexion resistance. What does that end up doing? Ends up creating greater symmetry between the right and left sides of the body. Now let's just again look at standing support mode. As you can see, registers no longer moving forward, ramps up that plantar flexion, dorsiflexion resistance, yet keep in mind, it still allows that normal 5 to 7 degrees of postural sway. We are not locking that ankle, but rather ramping up the resistance to provide them enhanced stability and balance. We are not locking the ankle because we want to allow that postural sway to continue to occur. What does this end up meaning? Well, it ends up meaning that you have less moments about the knee. The knee isn't trying to control a knee flexion moment or a knee extension moment. Rather, it's providing that co-activation of the anterior muscles in your shin and the posterior muscles in your shin, just like your contralateral limb, to provide you that stability in that position when you stop. Fast walk mode, again, you're getting increased plantar flexion resistance, increased heel stiffness to get greater compression of that independent heel spring, to get that rapid tibial advancement to help progress you forward, while also getting a decreased dorsiflexion resistance so you can more easily get over your toe and you're not getting that excessive knee extension moment slowing you down. Again, like I mentioned before, you're going to have increased toe clearance. What you see there is the difference between an energy storing foot and the Elan and the Elan IC. Because it maintains that 3 degrees of dorsiflexion, it is not going back into its initial state, which a carbon fiber spring wants to return to. And if a carbon fiber spring wants to return to their steady state, they're going to get back into a 0 degrees or 90-degree position, as opposed to maintaining that 3 degrees of dorsiflexion. With that 3 degrees of dorsiflexion, you get improved toe clearance, about 18%, and up to 20 millimeters. So who is it for? It is for your typical K3 ambulator. Is this for someone who's playing basketball 3 days a week? No. If someone's playing basketball 3 days a week in their church league, which might be one of the more competitive leagues out there, I've seen more guys get thrown out of church league basketball than I've seen them get thrown out of the NBA, I think. But separate from that, or maybe it was just me that got thrown out a lot. But if you are playing basketball competitively a couple days a week, no. But if you're going to coach your son or daughter's basketball team, yes, you can use this foot. You can show them how to jog up and down. You can show them how to run certain drills. You can show them how to set a pick. You can show them how to do certain moves in basketball. Same thing. If you are going to be playing softball, is this the best thing for you? Probably not. But if you're going to be coaching your daughter's softball team, this is very appropriate. It's really for individuals who are walking up slopes, down slopes, walking on compliant surfaces, walking over rock, walking over grass. Kind of like if you think about anything you did today, you probably encountered many of those different terrains. That is who this is for, because you want that ability for the foot to adjust the plantar flexion, dorsiflexion resistance specific to that patient's needs immediately. It's not something that you have to pre-position to go up a hill or down a hill. It's not something that you have to reach down and put in lock mode to walk downstairs. It's not something that's waiting on 1 or 2 steps to accommodate in swing where to put the foot for the next step for swing. No, what it's doing is it's responding in real time to the needs of the patient. Let's see. Oh, another big key. If you have individuals who have socket discomfort or pain, this is an ideal foot for them. The reason being is that we have studies and we show that we demonstrate a decreased force in the limb, intrasocket pressures, in addition to lowering the force that is actually occurring. We are spreading that force, dissipating that force. So we're really cradling their residual limb throughout the gait cycle. There was a study that I want to bring to you that is of importance. And this one came out just about last year, I think about this time. And so you can read Microprocessor Feet improve prosthetic mobility and physical function relative to non-microprocessor feet. Well, what did they do? Well, they had 20 individuals that were coming off of, let's call this a legacy foot. You can see it's a whole range. Some of them were hydraulic, some were shock absorption and rotation, some of them were energy storing and releasing, a whole range of different feet from different manufacturers across the board. What did they do? Well, they had these individuals on these feet, and they asked them some pretty important questions. That came under the Promise PF, and I'll show you some of those questions. They also evaluated them on the mobility through a PEQ and a QOL. Then what they did is they took those individuals and they put them on different microprocessor feet. And these were the different feet these individuals were on. As you can see, 60% out of the 20, 12 out of the 20 were on the Elan. So we feel pretty confident that the results of this study we can attribute to our foot. So I'm going to go back to what did they ask them? Well, I can tell you we decreased this up to 81% and we provide 18 millimeters of this, but what's functionally happening? What's happening in their everyday life? So they asked them these questions. They asked them these questions when they were on their legacy foot, and then on average, 31 days later, they asked these questions of the individuals on that microprocessor foot, the different feet that I showed you earlier. Well, what did they ask? Well, let's look. One of the questions, are you able to do chores such as vacuuming or yard work? And there's a range without any difficulty to unable to do. So it's a 1 to 5 range. Does your health now limit you in lifting or carrying groceries? Not at all, up to cannot do. Again, a 1 to 5 range. And they ask these individuals these questions because this is what's happening in their everyday life. how are you living your everyday life? And again, they went and 31 days on average, they asked these individuals those same questions after being fit with a microprocessor foot. It is key to understand they did not change the socket. The socket was the same regardless. That just popped up. All right. The socket was the same regardless. Let's see, I got to go over here now because it's not letting me. So, what were the statistically significant improvements? And I think you will say these are also clinically significant improvements. That PROMIS PF, the scores were statistically significantly increased. The report of prosthetic fit was improved, statistically significant. Improved sitting comfort, back pain, decreased, didn't increase. Improved ability to walk up a hill, improved ability to walk down a hill. In some ways, this doesn't surprise me that our microprocessor line of the Elan and the Elan IC did so well on this. Well, why? Well, because we can independently adjust plantar flexion and dorsiflexion, it's going to change and improve hill ascent and descent. As a result of the ability to have that plantar flexion ramp up when you're standing on a hill, the plantar flexion, dorsiflexion resistance ramp up when you're standing on a hill, where you're going to get more equal loading of the prosthetic side and the contralateral limb, which is going to reduce your back pain. Because of 6 degrees of dorsiflexion, 6 degrees of plantar flexion and 3 degrees of dorsiflexion, you're going to have more options for how you can position your limb when you're sitting. Because we're cradling that limb throughout the gait cycle and decreasing forces internally on the residual limb, it's going to fit better. It's really also important to know no one reported increased weight. Often it's brought up like microprocessor foot, it's heavier, and the patient's going to feel that and they're not going to like it. That was not reported in this study. So again, the clinical significance of improving their physical function scores, we can say the numbers that we have, but that's the proof in the pudding when the patient says it was better for my everyday function. 2 or 3 more slides, and then we're done. It's really critical to properly align every prosthesis, but especially ours. And the reason being is because that weight line is a little bit more anterior. And also, we've got to somehow figure out a way to neutralize that 6 degrees of plantar flexion. So here is the steps. One, there's a wedge that comes with the Elan and the Elan IC, along with our Echelon series and our Avalon. That is a 6-degree wedge. Why is it a 6-degree wedge? Because we have 6 degrees of plantar flexion. So you put the foot in the shoe for the patient so you get the proper heel height adjustment. Fully plantar flex the foot. Put the foot on the wedge with the toe going down, the heel at the higher part of the wedge. Achieve a neutral pylon. You're going to have to make adjustments, typically, at the connection, at that connection between the foot and your distal adapter. Get a neutral pylon, and once you get the neutral pylon, then you can look at your socket bisection and appropriately build it through the target. What's really nice on the Elan and our other feet is that we do provide you with that alignment line and a range, which is very easily seen from the side of the foot. So again, foot in shoe, fully plantar flex the foot, heel high side of the wedge, achieve a neutral pylon in that sagittal plane, and then adjust at the socket to make any adjustments, AP slide or angular adjustments to achieve the proper bisection of the socket. Programming is simple. It is Android based. So if you have a tablet, this is on a tablet, and you can see everything is there on one page. Just like with creating your check socket, that's where you put a lot of time and energy so that your definitive fitting goes well. Same thing here. Dial in your alignment, dial in your plantar flexion and dorsiflexion resistance, and then calibrate. It's the alignment and the plantar flexion, dorsiflexion resistance that has to happen. It's critical. Then you get a smooth calibration and it's easy. So again, it's Android based, and you can use it on your phone, on your tablet. If you don't have a tablet and you want to do a demo, or you don't have an Android-based device, reach out to your territory manager and we can help you out so that that demo goes smoothly. On our website, huge information, lots of information about the numerous studies, because we are the most studied, research studied microprocessor ankle on the market. And you can find that information there. Or if you can't, just reach out to Mike or I or your territory manager and we can get that to you. So here is the QR code to scan for the webinar test. I believe we prefer you get it back to us within about a week so that we can hand it into ABC.
Yeah, that's right, Chad. Or Todd, sorry. The quiz, this is for ABC credits. The quiz, I give you 1 week to complete. So I'll submit them to ABC next week, probably next Thursday. So go ahead and complete the quiz. I will send this out in an email link also. Some people have trouble with QR codes, so I'll make sure to send it out in an email link, not a QR code, following the webinar later on this afternoon. So you do have about a week to complete that, but that is required. If you need a certificate because you're a state license or whatever criteria it is that you need a certificate for, send me an email directly and I can get that to you. Again, my email is mike.magee, and that's spelled MAGEE @blatchfordus.com. And I can get you a certificate if you need it. I didn't mean to cut you off there, Todd. If you want to do a couple wrap up stuff, and then I've got a couple more things to say right quick, and then we can.
Yeah. If you have any questions, shoot them to the chat. But again, as you can see, you guys can read that. But the benefits for the EMT is that they're going to receive improved safety, greater control and stability, improved comfort, improved limb loading between the prosthetic side and the contralateral side, improved energy efficiency. Individuals actually with the Echelon series and our Elan have a self-selected walking speed that is higher than with an energy storing and releasing foot. Often your thought is, oh, it's going to slow them down because of the hydraulics. It's actually the opposite is true. They're going to be able to walk quicker and overall improve patient satisfaction. So hopefully we'll leave it open for the next couple minutes to answer any questions.
Yeah, thanks, Todd. A couple of other things I was thinking about. You did a fantastic job explaining what the Elan does and what makes it so unique to the marketplace, and what makes it, in my opinion, the most widely adopted microprocessor foot out there, and why it's so good for bilaterals. I know for a fact there's one gentleman on the call today who's fitting a couple of bilaterals tomorrow, and that's and that's been quite successful. So if you've got bilateral patients, and you may be asking yourself, does it work with transfemoral? Well, absolutely. You can fit this on a transfemoral patient, no problem. But obviously the links takes the technology that's in the Elan and adds it to a microprocessor need, to where the two are talking to one another. So you get the benefits that Todd brought up on the foot, but then carried over and working in unison with the knee, making one complete system. So kind of keep that in mind. It does work very well for transfemorals. We have gotten a few questions. I put my email, they asked for my email. I put that in the chat. Let me see if I can somehow send that. There you go. That's my email address. You guys should be able, everybody should be able to see that. Can we make Bluetooth any easier? Well, if you haven't used the tablet, Gabriel, the tablet for our programming is significantly easier than a PC. The Bluetooth in the device works very well. The challenge with Bluetooth connection is different computers. The only way to avoid that is to have a different dongle that's specific for our foot, and we want to try to avoid that proprietary stuff and make it simpler by having it connect to all the computers, but sometimes that causes a challenge. So you do need to make sure if you're using the PC, that it just take a little bit more extra effort. Again, we can help you through that process, but the tablet makes things significantly easier. So if you're fitting an Elan or an Elan IC, ask your territory manager for a tablet, and they might be able to get you one to help with the programming method. So one question said, so adjust the plantar dorsiflexion resistance first and then calibrate. That's the best method because then you know you get your dynamic alignment set as you would like for it to be. So that's the way we recommend it. Get your plantar flexion and dorsiflexion nice and smooth, and then you can calibrate it. And that will make the unit adapt for level ground, cadence selection, but then also up and down slopes. So that's how we recommend that. Let's see, that's all the questions I have currently. We're here for the next 6 minutes. So feel free. I've also seen lots of people start answering the quiz. I get a response whenever that happens. So so thank you for doing that. But if you have any questions, please chime in. Let's see, we got one here. Yeah, I already answered that one, sorry. Todd mentioned the studies, and he showed those things. They are on our website. You can always download them from there. We've got a white paper that specifically talks about hydraulic ankle. The hydraulic ankle range is so widely studied and so widely proven. That's why it's been replicated across multiple manufacturers, is they see the benefit to it. So we know it works very well. We've got all those studies on our website that can help prove that. Any other questions? I think I've gotten them all so far on the Q&A panel. All right, Todd, do you have any parting comments or thoughts?
No, if you have not, except I say no and then I say yes. If you have is it Friday yet? But if you have not used the Elan or even our Echelon, definitely reach out to your territory manager, demo it, give it a shot, have one of your patients come in, either a new patient, established patient, whatever, whatever's comfortable for you, and give it a shot. Think of that patient population that can benefit from decreasing gait compensations, from improving prosthetic fit, that can benefit from having true articulation combined with heel and toe spring deflection for energy return, and the right amount of energy return, whether it's getting energy absorption or whether it's getting energy creation and propulsion. Think about those patients and try it. If you believe it's heavy, have your patient try it. See what they think. Have them walk in it, and then just see if they even respond or even mention the weight. Typically, they don't, unless we bring it up, I feel like. But, you know, just try it. We have an excellent demo process. Definitely work through your territory manager to give it a shot and give it a try and experience it for yourself and your patient.
It's a great point, Todd. And back to the weight comment right quick, because it is one of our biggest comments that we hear from people is it's just too heavy for my patients. But that study that he showed, one of the things that it found, while it did not quite meet statistical significance, it was very, very close to meeting statistical significance. It found that the patients did not notice the weight as a problem. That was not something that concerned them. It was not an issue. So it goes to what Todd was just saying there, that the patients don't report it as being extra heavy. So again, give it a shot, give it a go, reach out to the territory manager. They'd be happy to set up a demo, a trial, and let your patient make the choice. Thank you all for joining today. I really appreciate your attendance, and look for us next month. We'll be doing it again. We do it every third or fourth week of the month at 2 o'clock Eastern. Thank you so much for being here. And if you have any questions, I have included Todd's email there and my email. So feel free to reach out to us. Thank you so much and have a great week.